Wellness Warriors. Welcome to the Burnout Resolution Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobe. I'm a board-certified medical doctor with over 20 years of experience now in walking alongside my clients and helping thousands of them beat burnout for good. In today's episode, we're going to tackle burnout, metabolism, and the missing macro. In my 20 years of experience, the one macronutrient that I've noticed that most people leave off their list is actually protein. And for those people who know me, they know I'm a huge protein nut. I love protein. And I'm going to share with you today why I've come to love protein so much. So in addition to being a physician, I'm also a gym rat. And a lot of people think that protein is just for athletes, just for bodybuilders. And that's just not the case. So I've created a two-part podcast where today we're going to have our first episode. I'm going to walk you through why protein is such an essential and probably the most essential macronutrient that we need to eat each and every day to prevent and resolve burnout. Even health professionals have underestimated the importance of protein in our diets. In fact, we used to downplay protein and tell people that protein was dangerous and that we shouldn't eat very much. This came from the fact that we didn't know how to properly study people's protein requirements, and we grossly underestimated how much protein people needed for decades. And there are a lot of clues as to why protein is important, regardless of studies. And as a bit of a rebel, I never really bought into the low protein requirements and recommendations. Because again, as a gym rat, I used to watch bodybuilders, and when I was a kid, I loved watching worldwide wrestling just because I admired how people could sculpt their bodies into what I was seeing on TV. And as I got older and got interested in healthcare and anatomy and how people sculpted their muscles into what I was watching on TV as a kid, protein became a huge factor. Now, of course, there's the dark side of that scene, right, with anabolic steroid use and all of that. So we're not talking about that. I was never interested in that piece. And when I went through medical school, we learned a little bit about nutrition, but not very much. So I found myself studying about bodybuilding nutrition. And as I was studying physiology and matching up what I was seeing in my own studies about bodybuilding, I began to see some things emerge that didn't make sense with the medical studies that I was reading. Bodybuilders consume a ton of protein. And as I delved more and more into medical research on my own, I began to realize that a lot of the ways that we study things in medicine is inaccurate. I was a bit of a rebel again, even with my patients. I would often say, this is the recommended daily allowance. However, I recommend this. And I found myself in between the bodybuilding recommendations and the medical community's recommendations. So I found the middle ground that I would recommend that my clients take so that they weren't under eating protein as our medical studies were indicating they should, but also not overeating protein because most of them were not bodybuilders. And so fast forward a decade and a half maybe, studies started to emerge to suggest that the RDA that we had been following for so many years was, in fact, grossly underestimating how much protein we needed. And the studies started to validate moving more towards the middle as I was doing. And again, that doesn't mean that I was some genius that figured things out that nobody knew about. If we really look into the physiology of the body, it's obvious that we need more protein. So if we look at our body mass, if we take water out of the picture, 99% of our body by molecule is water. And so obviously hydration is extremely important. But if we take the water out and we look at the components and the structure of the human body, 50% of it is protein. Your hormones are made of protein. Your enzymes are made of protein. Your cell walls, the powerhouses of each and every one of your cells, the mitochondria, are made mostly of protein. Obviously, your muscles are made of protein. Many of the tissues, bones, are made of protein. And every single cell contains inside of it. So in addition to the walls of your cells being made about 50% out of protein, the inside of your cells contain 1 to 3 billion protein molecules. So protein outside of water makes up the vast majority of your body's structure and what it uses to function, such as enzymes, hormones, even the neurotransmitters that control your mood are made out of amino acids or converted from amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. And so even your mood is controlled by how much protein you eat. Your hormone balance is controlled by how much protein you eat. Whether or not you can make enough enzymes to digest your food and run your metabolism depends on how much protein you eat. So if we look at what else the body is made of, 25% of its dry weight is fat, and about 7% or so are minerals, and the leftovers are DNA fragments, RNA, and other things that we need for our genetic function. Carbohydrates make up a very small percentage of our dry body mass, so it's only about 1% of our body that's actually made out of carbohydrates. And so carbs are generally a fuel source. The good news about proteins is they also are a fuel source. And studies are showing that having a high protein diet helps you lower your carbohydrates and use protein as a source of fuel. Your body is much more efficient at using protein for fuel than it is using carbs for fuel. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. But high protein diets are shown over and over again in studies to be very effective for weight maintenance and weight loss. So very early on in my medical career, as I started to learn these things about the human body, it just made sense to recommend more protein consumption to my client. And then the studies came later to verify and to give me some sense of relief that I was actually looking in the right direction. Medical studies tend to fall behind. They don't keep up with the times. They don't keep up with demands. And so as a physician, I often find myself looking outside of my regular medical journals to give my clients the most up-to-date information. And very often, those medical studies don't show these things. It's nutrition journals, for example, or journals on metabolism and cell function that give us the information that we need that we can then assimilate into our medical practices. Protein is also a huge component for skin health as well. And so protein is a huge anti-aging supplement. We'll talk about the collagen controversy also in a little bit, but protein is essential for tissue recovery, cellular regeneration, metabolism, hormone function, and much, much more. Other macronutrients are also important. For example, fat. 25% of our dry weight is fat. And so eating really good, healthy fats is important. Fats are really essential for brain function, cellular integrity, hormone function, and much more. Carbs are essentially only a mechanism of fuel. We tend to overeat carbohydrates just by our nature because they're easier to find. It's actually challenging to eat enough protein. And we'll talk about some of the ways that you can assure that you're getting enough protein and know how much protein you actually require. Burnout isn't just about stress. It's not just about work. Burnout is a metabolic issue. Burnout is a physical issue where your body is incapable of keeping up with your demands on an energetic level. So with stress, with high pressure jobs and positions, and with just everyday living, right? We're all living on planet Earth right now. And everybody has a challenge of some kind. We have global challenges, national challenges, individual challenges, family challenges. Everywhere we turn, we're being stretched. And so this places a lot of metabolic demand on each and every one of our bodies. And if our metabolism isn't cranking out the energy that we need to keep up with that demand, we get these supply-demand mismatches. If those supply-demand mismatches become severe enough, we go into a burnout state. So burnout is when you just cannot meet those energetic demands. And no matter how much sleep you get, you're still exhausted. No matter how well you think you're eating, you're still exhausted. No matter how much exercise you try to do, or breath work, or meditation, nothing seems to work. That's burnout. You get brain fog, can't think clearly, you can't focus. This is burnout. And yes, traumas and stress start you down the slippery slope, but it's the physical changes that actually happen in your body that result in the burnout symptoms. And that's where we need to also focus in order to get ourselves out of burnout. And protein is the most important macronutrient in pillar number 1, which is eat. Most people in burnout are rapidly losing muscle mass and even bone structure. Again, because of this supply-demand mismatch, your body uses your bones and your muscles as a backup energy source. And so this is how we lose our muscle mass, and we can develop even osteoporosis, or what we call brittle bones. And you don't have to be 60 and 70 years old to lose your muscle mass and get brittle bones. I see that in younger and younger people each and every day. Burnout is often extremely frustrating as well because of everything we just said, right? No matter what you try to do, you can't quite get yourself out of the hole. So one of the most important first strategies in the eat pillar is to really teach my clients how much protein they need, what protein sources are going to be the best for them based on their dynamic metabolic type. But what we're going to talk about today are some common sense options and strategies that you can use to make sure you're getting the proper amount and quality of protein that you need to run your metabolism. When you don't eat enough protein, your body can't repair itself, it can't restore itself, and it can't run its own metabolism. Again, protein can be used as fuel for your body, so it replaces carbs. So while we can't run on just a carbohydrate diet, we can run on a pretty high protein diet, shave down the carbs, and have some really good quality fats. And no, I'm not necessarily talking about a ketogenic diet. We'll talk about the keto diet down the road as well and how it's not a long-term tool or solution. But eating enough protein with a balanced diet is a proven method to keep your weight normal or to lose weight if you feel like you do need to lose weight, while maintaining proper metabolism, proper health, giving your body its ability to repair itself, control inflammation, and just be healthy. When your body is able to do that, you can't really be in a burnout state at the same time. So protein always emerges as the long-term strategy, as well as a great short-term solution. Now, of course, I'm not asking anyone to just eat protein, right? You want to fill it out. You need your good fats, you need your veggies, leafy veggies, bright colored veggies to give you the micronutrients that we talked about, the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants, because nothing works in a vacuum. Protein sources, though, do have quite a few minerals in them, as well as balanced vitamins. Now, we're going to also talk in episode 2 about vegan diets and omnivore diets, so that whichever side of the fence you're on there, you can still beat burnout in a healthy way and make sure that you're picking and choosing the right proteins in the right amounts to help you stay healthy. So we talked a little bit about how studies tend to not keep up with reality, right? So the recommended daily allowance for protein was 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So when we talk about grams, when we're talking about macronutrients, we're not talking about the weight on a scale. We're talking about the caloric value. 4 ounces of a protein might have, for example, 20 grams of protein in it. If you have 20 grams of protein, that is equal to 80 calories worth of protein. Protein has 4 calories per gram. Happens to be the equivalent of the amount of calories in carbs as well. So 1 gram of carb is equal to 4 calories as well. However, proteins and carbs are very different. Proteins also give you structure and function, whereas carbs only give you fuel. Proteins also give you fuel. So protein is a very versatile macronutrient, whereas carbs are very restrictive in their functions. Now, we do need some carbs in our diet, right? So our muscles and our brains require actual carbohydrates to function. Now, yes, proteins can be converted into carbs, but to take the carbs in as carbohydrates is also important for muscle and brain health. And so we don't want to completely eliminate carbs from our diet. We also don't want to overconsume them, because if we overconsume carbs, our body only has one choice of what to do with that carb if it can't immediately burn it. It has to store it as fat. Proteins are not treated the same way by your body. Proteins come in as proteins, they're broken down into amino acids, and then they're reconstructed into protein or neurotransmitters. Now, the beauty of a protein is if your body needs calories to use for fuel, it can actually convert that protein into carbs. And it does it very precisely so that you're not over making carbs. So there's really no way that you can convert a protein into fat, whereas your body can very easily convert a carb into fat. So that's another advantage of protein, which is why I love protein as a macro source. So we talked a little bit about how medical studies always seem to be like decades behind clinical practice and what's going on in the real world. So the RDA for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, or shockingly, 0.36 grams per pound of body weight. Protein requirements may be, in fact, as high as 1 gram per pound of body weight if you're trying to put on muscle mass or recover from burnout. So to go from 0.36 grams to 1 gram, that's almost 3 times as much protein. And newer studies are confirming that, yes, in some cases, we might need to recommend that much protein to someone for their recovery. It turns out that your protein requirements actually go up as you age in order to continue to maintain body function over time. Now, if someone is overweight or obese, clinically obese, you don't want to eat per pound of body weight. Then you might want to look at your lean body mass as an indicator of how much protein to eat. So for example, if you are overweight and you want to lose weight, you don't necessarily want to have 0.8 grams or 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. You want to convert your weight into lean body mass so that you have a better sense of how much protein to eat as a guide for healthy weight loss. So to have 0.36 grams per pound of body weight as a protein requirement, which is what the RDA recommends, the recommended daily allowance, that's only about 54 grams of protein a day, which is nowhere near enough protein. The bare minimum that I usually recommend to my clients is 80 grams, as high as 150 in certain cases. Men require more protein than women because of their increased muscle mass and bone structure, and so the recommendations can vary quite widely. But there are some really good formulas that you can follow to tell you exactly how much protein you need. And in our 7-day Metabolism Reset Challenge, we'll provide you with those calculators and a great workbook that you can use during those 7 days to figure everything out about protein that you need and to start applying it into your everyday nutrition to start lifting you up and out of burnout. Or if you just want to prevent burnout, don't want to go down that slippery slope, you can apply the same tactics in our 7-day challenge as well. So don't forget to join us. The link's below, and I'll be providing more details as we get closer. And here's what's wild. Studies consistently show that high protein diets are more effective than any low fat, low carb diet, and is even superior to the ketogenic diet for long-term benefits. So what's a high protein diet? It's meeting your protein requirements based on the latest research, not the outdated RDA. Incorporating that into your diet each and every day while surrounding that protein with healthy, green, leafy, bright colored vegetables, some carbs, and good fats like olive oil, nuts, seeds, coconut oil, for example, avocado oil or avocados. So when I show my clients how their plates should look, I tell them to put the protein smack in the middle. It's the most important thing. Then surround it with the green leafy veggies, and then plus or minus the carbs based on what you're doing. The rest of those few hours that meal is going to be assimilated into your body. Food takes a good hour or two to be digested and assimilated and run through your metabolism so that you can actually use it for fuel. And so looking at what you're doing over the next 3-ish hours as you're preparing your meal is important. How much carb do I want to throw into this plate? Do I need carbs right now? If the answer is this is dinner and I'm about to go to bed in 3 hours, you don't need carbs because remember, those carbs are fuel. And so if you don't have anything that you're going to fuel other than sitting on the couch reading a book or going to bed, you probably don't want to add the carbs there. But for your breakfast, it's essential because you need that energy in addition to the protein and the green leafies to fuel the next several hours, right? The middle of our day is usually the time when we're expending the most calories and our demands are the highest. And so we need to meet that supply. So breakfast is really critical. This is why I'm not a fan of intermittent fasting in general. And then lunch is super important too, because that's going to fuel that sleepy time, right? When people start to feel like they want to go take a nap, like for that 4 or 5 o'clock crash and burn period. That's usually because they didn't eat enough for breakfast. They were going on borrowed time at their busiest time of the day, and then the body is really crashing and burning, and then they start getting cravings and fatigue at about 4 or 5 o'clock because they didn't fuel the earlier part of their day. And so lunch is extremely important as well. Dinner is probably the least important meal of the day. Even though we tend to spend the most time on dinner, we tend to make it the biggest meal of the day when it should actually be the opposite. And breakfast should actually be the biggest meal, followed by lunch, and then dinner is kind of lighter. Again, a good protein source, green leafies, some small amounts of good fat, and then not many carbs at dinner for most people, unless you're going to go work out, right? So a lot of people work out at night. So if you need that dinner meal to fuel your workout, then you want to bring a carb in to that meal. But if, again, all you're really doing is winding down for the day, then you might want to leave that carb out. By carbs, things like root vegetables, grains, fruits, for example. Green leafy veggies don't really count as carbs per se. They're not as calorie dense. They're nutrient dense, so they have tons of great vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, but they don't have a ton of calories. And so you can pile up your plate at dinner with all kinds of green leafy veggies, bright colored vegetables without a care. You want to be very careful with your root vegetables, your fruits, and your green, because those are really calorie dense as well. They're also healthy, but the calories are what are going to get you at night. If you're not burning them, they have to be stored as fat. So when you eat enough protein, if you meet your protein requirements at breakfast and lunch and dinner, you're usually not that hungry. And so you don't want to really throw in the extra carbs, and you don't feel as snackish later on in the evening because there's just not enough room for all that food. So if protein is really your dominant macro, followed by those green leafies and then some small amounts of fat, that's usually quite filling if you're doing that 3 times a day. And so most people don't feel like they have carb cravings after that, or even in between that. Now, if you do still have some cravings, then a quick protein shake is very helpful. I often recommend to my clients that even their snacks contain a good bit of protein because, again, you don't want to load up on carbs for snacks, which a lot of my clients do before they understand how carbs and proteins are metabolized in their bodies and how those carbs are fueling their burnout instead of actually helping them get out of burnout. So while people think if my metabolism's running low, I need to have more carbs to have more fuel, it actually backfires if you're not having enough protein. And most people are shocked to see that they're gaining weight even when they take the carbs away. The usual reason for that is because you have to fill in those gaps somewhere. And so most people then start eating more fatty food instead of, again, reaching their protein requirements because unfortunately the studies were misleading for so long. So people think that they need to keep the lid on their protein and play around and tinker with the fats and the carbs when it's really the protein that needs the most adjustment. So I don't even have my clients count carb calories if I know they're meeting their protein requirements because it's really not possible to overeat carbs at that point. And I also don't necessarily ask them to add in fat because fats are usually collateral damage from eating the protein and cooking. And so again, no matter which way you slice the pie, paying attention to the protein is the most important thing. Proteins have what we call a higher thermic effect. In other words, they burn more calories through their digestion. Proteins also balance blood sugar levels, so they prevent those spikes of insulin and sugar that people that overeat carbs tend to get trapped in. So proteins stabilize your insulin, which is the hormone that takes sugar out of your bloodstream to use it for fuel. So protein prevents sugar spikes, which often leads to fat storage and inflammation. So avoiding those sugar spikes is very anti-inflammatory. And so protein, if you eat the right sources of it, is actually anti-inflammatory. Now, if you eat the wrong proteins, if you're eating proteins that are given pesticide-laden grains to eat and that are not fed properly or are given hormones, then that's pro-inflammatory. If you're having organic protein sources that are fed healthy grains without pesticides, not genetically modified, not given hormones, then that's anti-inflammatory. Vegan protein sources are also quite anti-inflammatory. We'll talk about the controversy with the vegan diet versus the omnivore diet. We'll also talk about some of the gaps in the vegan diet that often leads people down the slippery slope of burnout in episode 2. Protein is also very satisfying, whereas carbs make you more and more hungry. You ever notice that? If you have just a carb, 30 minutes later, you're still hungry. But if you do that with a protein, you won't feel the same way because protein triggers that you're not hungry anymore a lot more effectively than carbs do. And also, protein preserves your muscle mass, which is the holy grail in weight loss. So if you're feeling frustrated about stubborn weight gain or weight that just won't come off, feeling tired all the time, energy crashes and yo-yo diets, protein is your best friend. And now we're going to cover protein quality. So we touched on this a little bit just a minute ago, but the quality of the protein that you consume is extremely important. So not only do you need to hit your protein requirement number, but you have to also pay attention to the quality of the protein that you're consuming in getting to that number. So grass-fed, grass-finished meats, wild-caught fish, and again, even that's controversial, right? Because of the mercury in the oceans now. However, wild-caught fish is still, despite the mercury, your safer option because of the higher nutritional quality. So you want to stay away from the fish that tend to hunt, the large hunter fish, such as tuna and swordfish and mackerel, for example, and eat other types of wild caught fish, for example, salmon or cod. Shellfish is also great too, but again, make sure it's wild caught. That way you're avoiding the mercury and still getting the nutritional quality of a fish that grew in the ocean. Farm-raised fish are just not as nutritionally sound. Some farm-raised fish is completely devoid of good fish oils, for example. Clean vegan options such as seitan, tofu, tempeh, edamame. Now, we're going to touch on this in episode 2, but the volume of vegan options that you need to consume to get the same amount of protein as you would an animal product is a lot. Sometimes you need to eat 3 times as much vegan protein to equal the same amount that you'd get in a smaller portion of an animal-based protein. In other words, in order to get 30 grams of protein, for example, you can consume about 5 ounces of chicken, which is a little bit more than the size of my fist. In order to get that same amount of protein with lentils, for example, you'd have to consume 3 cups of lentils. And unfortunately, with that 30 grams of protein that you get in those 3 cups of lentils, you're getting 100 grams of carbohydrates. So you're getting 700 calories worth of food to get 30 grams of protein. Whereas with the chicken breast, for example, you're getting 120 calories worth of food to get the 30 grams of protein. And so this is where, again, if you're vegan, you want to be very cautious with how you get your protein sources. We're going to dive deep into this in episode 2 because it's important. The other issue with vegan sources is you want to make sure that you're supplementing with complete proteins. So often vegan diets are missing leucine, which is a critical amino acid for muscle mass and muscle building and preservation. So sometimes you can fill those gaps in with vegan protein shakes, which we'll talk about in episode 2 as well. And collagen-rich foods, for example, bone broth. Bone broth is an excellent source of collagen. Collagen is the main protein in the human body. And we're going to dive deep into the collagen controversy in episode 2 as well. Just briefly, for the critics of collagen who say that it's not worth consuming collagen because it gets broken down into things that are not collagen, what I say is, so do bananas and apples and nuts and seeds and anything else you consume. It never stays the thing you ate when you eat it. So why not eat the thing you want it to become in your body, right? So why not eat collagen-rich foods? Because it has all of the components of the collagen in it that then your body can reassemble into the collagen. Now, it may be true that it may not reach your skin and connective tissues, because as we've touched on in other podcasts, these are deprioritized tissues in your body if your metabolism isn't robust. So if there's a supply-demand mismatch, your body will not want to release resources to skin and connective tissue and musculoskeletal tissues because your body is going to use that collagen and send it to where it thinks it's more important, heart, lungs, and other internal organs. So it's not so much that the collagen supplements aren't working. It's that they're insufficient to do all of the work of making sure that you're meeting your demand. So having collagen and enough protein and good fats and green leafy bright colored vegetables will help reduce the supply-demand mismatch and release the collagen so it can go to your skin and connective tissue. So it's not that the supplements aren't necessarily working. It's that it depends on your metabolism. So in my opinion, and the reason that I personally eat animal-based protein is because animals have muscles. And so you want to eat the thing that you want it to become in your body, right? It just makes sense. And so if you eat collagen, you'll have the breakdown products of the collagen in your body that can then be used for whatever your body deems appropriate. Your body is always calculating according to immediate survival. So if you're taking a collagen supplement and you're not seeing the benefits in your skin and your connective tissue, that's your first sign that there's a supply-demand mismatch that your body can't meet, and that's why it's not getting to the skin and the connective tissue. Now, again, we've touched on this in prior podcasts. You have to be absorbing in order for those things to get through, right? So if you haven't watched our previous podcasts, I invite you to watch the ones on GI health and the one on SIBO, the missing link to burnout, to help guide you through that. So if you're feeling frustrated, having difficulty losing weight, feeling exhausted, even your mood, like even mood relies on protein intake. If you feel like you have excess inflammation in your body that you can't just get rid of, I invite you to look at your protein intake. It may be the simplest and most powerful shift that you make that helps you get out of burnout and to live your best life. To help you take action, I created a free 7-day burnout resolution and metabolism reset challenge. Every day, you'll get short videos, cheat sheets, and step-by-step guidance to help you calculate your optimal protein intake, choose the best foods and supplements to get you there, reduce inflammation, and finally feel like yourself again. Join now using the link in the show notes below. Next episode, we're going to dive deep into plant-based versus animal-based protein sources, the pros, the cons, protein myths, and how to overcome obstacles in getting clean protein sources, especially when you're on the go and not feeling your best. Don't miss it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share and subscribe. And again, our podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. My passion is to share this vital information with as many people as possible. To learn more, visit awakenedwellnessnow.com. Feel free to take our new burnout assessment. And until next time, many blessings. Thank you.